Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today we'll be reviewing the Montecarlos Gesha wash processed El Salvador from Passenger Coffee. And there's the bag right there. And Passenger, based out of Lancaster, Pennsylvania. And they're a coffee roaster that's appeared on this channel a couple of times over the last month, including our review of the Montecarlos Pacamara. And while purchasing that coffee, I decided to add this one alongside it, as it felt like a great opportunity to compare and contrast those two different coffees, as well as review something that's a little bit more in line with my own preferences. So I'm definitely looking forward to discussing this one, as this right here is day 40. And recipe we went with for this coffee was, once again, Passenger's recipe, which is a 15.625 to 1 water to coffee ratio, brewed at 99 degrees Celsius, about 210 degrees Fahrenheit. And I liked this one best through the V60, which indicates a more medium fine grind. Roast profile for this coffee, as we've mentioned in these recent Passenger reviews, they continue to roast on the lighter side of things, as once again I was surprised to find out how light this coffee was when reviewing it, as this one once again is on that more moderately light side of things. It's not necessarily the lightest coffee in the world, but it is still on the lighter side of things by most standards and metrics. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and start discussing this coffee. Day 15, first impression, and we did opt for the V60, and the cup had wonderful and immense clarity and structure right off the bat, as it skews much more on the traditional Central American side of things, but with better structure overall. Very clean, with a heightened focus on the well-defined milk chocolate base. Very drinkable, as it had a very smooth body, accentuated by the complementary floral aspects and a softer citric component. Overall, a very pretty cup of coffee. We move on to day 18, as we opted for the Chemex, and it was notably different, as there was a slight bit more herbality to the cup and a little bit more of that minty quality, which kind of interestingly, we've had a little bit of that minty quality in all of the coffees that we have reviewed from Passenger recently. It did dissipate a fair bit as it cooled down, though, with more of the lemon attributes to contrast that milk chocolate base, with a slight vanilla wafer-like sweetness also present. Plenty of depth, another really nice day, and based off the first couple of impressions I had of this coffee compared to the other ones we had from Passenger, I felt that this one was just offering a little bit more variety and depth to it overall. Continue on to day 21, as we opted for the April brewer, and it felt slightly heavier with a little bit more intensity to the milk chocolate base. The body remains a notable factor, with some subtle sweeter floral aspects in the background as well. A little different, still good, just a little bit more intense. We continue on to day 24, as we opted for the V60 with Passenger's recipe, and this was a little less balanced, as there was a little bit more focus on the citric attributes at the forefront in a slightly more uneven sense. It does settle into a better defined milk chocolate and vanilla-like wafer once again. This was still solid, and even though this is the brew method and recipe we opted for, it improved after this day. This day was a little bit of an anomaly, still a very good day. The coffee for the most part has been pretty consistent, just some minor differences in these cups. Continue on to day 27, as we opted for the Chemex with Passenger's recipe, and this was extremely in line with expectations we had had for Central American coffees. And I think going into this, I was unsure whether we were going to get more of the characteristics of the origin itself, the El Salvadorian origin, or if we are going to get more of the Gesha-like characteristics. And I feel like they did a very good job of kind of combining those two factors. And it still offered plenty of the Central American components, as you're hearing from all of the notes we had. Very well-defined soft milk chocolate base. But it also had some other attributes of the Gesha, specifically the sweeter florals, as well as that slightly bitter lemon attribute. So you're seeing both of these two things at play, and as a result, it kind of made for a very nice marriage of those two things. Pretty solid day. Continue on to day 30, as we opted for the V60 with Passenger's recipe, and this is the best the coffee had been to this point by far, as it offered plenty of similarities from our initial impression while having that very lovely chocolate base, complementary florality, citric brightness, pretty straightforward, but nonetheless still very well structured. Continue on to day 33, back through the V60, and there's been a lot of consistency, as right off brew there is terrific definition to that milk chocolate base, followed very well by some of the listed honeysuckle, floral, vanilla wafer like components settling into that listed lemon. Very well tiered as well, so you're experiencing just at the start that base, but in addition to that, the base is clean enough and it paves the way for all of the other attributes that follow behind that. Very straightforward in that sense, like it's just extremely well structured and layered, and you're feeling all of these things one by one. And that really nice part about Passenger is you can experience these in a cleaner sense and just very well articulated sense. Day 36, final day we have, back to the V60, and there's more consistency, continuing to offer that chocolate forward base with the notable honeysuckle-like aspects. Notable bit of citrus, pretty consistent all around. Notes pretty repetitive, mostly because the coffee has been very consistent with slight focus on different attributes on different days. All right, let's go ahead and put up the tasting wheel so you can see what we're getting. And we have quite a few level 4s. Let's start with the cleanliness level 4. So I think that might have been a big question as to where the cleanliness is going to finish in this one. I mentioned in the Montecarlos Pacamaro review that was the cleanest El Salvadorian coffee we had reviewed up to that point, as this one right here had even more clarity to it, though I fully expected that given that this is a Gesha and I was wanting it to have maybe that level 5 cleanliness. It's on the higher side of level 4. As mentioned, everything here is very well structured, very well defined. So having it there at the level 4, at least on the higher side of level 4 for an El Salvadorian coffee, is already off to a very nice start. Finish, level 4. Don't really have too much to add to that. It has a nice complex finish to it, as it's not necessarily just that chocolate. The chocolate mostly paves the way for having a bit more of a Gesha-like finish to it. So specifically those floral attributes, those citric attributes. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they're overly dominant or equal to even that chocolate base, but they're a little bit more subtle as you would expect from the Gesha to begin with. Sweetness, level 4. I think maybe the Montecarlos Pacamaro was slightly sweeter than this one. It was a different kind of sweetness, as this sweetness was a little bit more subtle in the chocolate and a little bit more focused on the floral aspects, while that one was just a little bit more straightforward in terms of a little bit of a candied sense to it, as well as that chocolate component. So different types of sweetness, and maybe that one was a little bit sweeter, but they're both still pretty sweet coffees, especially for El Salvadorian coffees. Florality, level 4, mentioned right at the start, honeysuckle present, prominent throughout, a little bit more of a sweeter floral vanilla also present within this coffee, so a little bit of depth and variety within that floral attribute as well. Citrus fruit, level 4, may have lemon listed on here, makes a lot of sense, a little bit more in line with a slightly bitter lemon to it, a little bit more of a sweeter component to it as well, so a little bit of depth and a little bit of complexity within that lemon attribute, so not just a very straightforward citrus, but a little bit of a varied citrus in this one. Chocolate, level 4, that's the first note I mentioned and the most consistent, prominent, pronounced, and intense part of this coffee, though even then it was still a little bit more subtle, as it was just a very nice kind of milk chocolate base that for the entirety of this coffee offered nice sweetness and a nice little starting point for the rest of the coffee that was to follow, as that gave you a good sense of the origin. But then from that point going forward, you're like, there's just much more to this coffee than this straightforward chocolate that you might expect from a Central American coffee. And then we have a couple of level 3s acidity. Once again, the coffees that we've had from Passenger haven't necessarily been the brightest. None of them really reached that level 4 mark. And I think making these tasting wheels side by side, I was saying nothing really is standing out in terms of the brightness, but that's fine by me. Once again, didn't really need this to be an overly bright coffee. I feel like there are enough other attributes in this one to kind of make up for that. Spice, level 3, once again, that slight minty herbal quality that was present within all 3 of these Passenger coffees that we've discussed. This one a little bit more on the subtle side of things, as the other ones, since they offered more intensity, you were feeling a little bit more of it, but given that this coffee in general was a little bit more subtle, you're not experiencing that in the same measure. And then final thing we're discussing, honestly, is the body at that level 2, as this one right here was definitely significantly less full bodied than the other coffees that was both scoring a level 4. This one right here, much more toned down. I think it was kind of interesting to me that even though this is a Gesha, I was expecting maybe the origin to have a little bit more of an effect on it and be a little closer to that level 3 mark. This was honestly between that 2 and the 3, but I said it skews a little bit on the lighter side of things, so we'll leave the body there at that level 2. But as I'm looking at this tasting wheel, I do think it's a pretty good representation of what I was getting from this coffee. All right, so my overall thoughts and impressions of this coffee. I feel like, and I could be wrong, this might be my favorite El Salvadorian coffee that we've ever reviewed on this channel, but I think the bar is honestly a little low, as we don't review too many El Salvadorian coffees, and El Salvador isn't necessarily my favorite origin out there, but I think the combination of the profile as well as the nice combination of the origin as well as the varietal really made for a very, I just want to say, much more diverse coffee, as opposed to the El Salvadorian coffees, especially the heavier processed ones that just skew way too far in one direction, and the washed ones that can be a little too, I'll say, delicate and boring. This one right here offered just better depth to it, specifically in terms of that florality, as that's one of the major selling points to me on this one. It hit on the big 4 things for me: the clarity, the florality, the sweetness, and while the fruit component may have been in a direction that's not necessarily within my own preferences, it still offered enough of a fruit component to say that all four of the things that I'm looking for in a coffee were present, and it was just very well structured, defined, and articulated by Passenger, who is one of the best at doing all of those things. So that's the same. I like this coffee a fair bit. It's, once again, nothing that's going to wow a whole lot of people. They're just going to find a great structure within this coffee, and that in itself can be a very nice achievement and a very nice coffee for most people. The type of person I would suggest this coffee to, if you're kind of curious, I feel like, once again, this is a very nice marriage between the two things of the origin as well as the varietal, because you're getting enough of those Central American characteristics. You're getting enough of that chocolate base. You're getting enough of that kind of slight herbal component to it as well. While at the same time, it does skew ever so slightly in that Gesha-like direction, offering the florality as well as citric components to it as well. So you really see the two things at play, and I think that makes for a much more fun and interesting drink, as one of the most important things to me is really trying all of these varietals and all of the different origins, because you get to kind of see how they act in different settings. I think that's kind of the best way I can leave this review. If you've by chance had an opportunity to try this coffee, I'd love to know your thoughts and impressions of it as well. If you're enjoying the content, give this video a like, subscribe if you're not already subscribed. This right here has been a review of the Montecarlos Gesha wash processed El Salvador from Passenger Coffee. Thank you for watching.